51 years I've lived up in that high, mean country, and I have learned one thing that the flatland preachers never will. The mountain does not care whether you are good. It does not weigh your heart. It takes the strong and the weak the same, and it buries them under the same white, and come spring the melt runs off both their graves without knowing the difference. So when a child came out of that tree line with her arms out and her mouth already open in a cry, I did not feel what you'd think a man ought to feel. I felt afraid, not of her, of what she wanted from me. Because up there, when something small comes toward you begging, it is never begging for something small. She said 4 words, "Please follow me home." And every year I have left since, I have wished, some nights, God forgive me, that I had turned my mule around and pretended I never heard them. But I didn't, and what was waiting at the end of that girl's tracks is the thing I have never once, in all the tellings, been able to leave out. Stay with me, this one doesn't go where you think. The first thing was the sound, and it was wrong. I want you to understand how quiet it is up at 9,000 feet in the last week of a hard winter. It is not the quiet of a room. It is the quiet of a place that has swallowed every soft thing and kept only the hard ones, the crack of a limb giving up under snow weight, the tick of ice, the long, empty hush of your own blood in your ears. I had been 3 weeks alone on my trap line by then, and a man learns to read that silence the way you'd read a face. When it changes, you look up. It changed. I was kneeling over a drowned marten in a creek set, my fingers gone the color of tallow, and I heard a sound that did not belong to any animal I trap or any wind I know. A high, ragged human sound, thin, coming apart at the edges. Crying. I froze the way you freeze when a thing you've decided is impossible happens anyway. Then I did what I always do when the world gets strange, which is I started counting. It's a habit, an old one and not a proud one. I count to keep my hands from thinking for me. 1, 2, 3. By the count of 9 the sound came again, and it was closer, and it was a child's. I stood up too fast, and my knees told me about all 51 years at once. She came out of the black timber at the edge of the clearing, and I will carry that picture to whatever ground they finally put me in. A girl, no more than 7 or 8, in a deer-hide dress gone stiff with cold, one moccasin and one bare purple foot, her black hair a single frozen rope down her back. Apache. I knew it the way you know weather. Her arms were already reaching, already out, before she'd even seen me clear, like she'd been running toward the idea of a person for so long that any shape would do. She saw me. She stopped. And in that half-second I watched her do the terrible arithmetic every child of that country learns young. Is this a man who will help me, or a man who will hurt me? Whatever she decided fast, because she came on. She stumbled across that snow crust falling and getting up and falling, and when she reached me she grabbed 2 fistfuls of my coat and looked up with a face swollen from crying and cold, and she said it in English. Broken, but English. Please, please follow me home. I'm going to tell you the truth of what I did, because if I dress it up the rest of this won't mean anything. I did not move. I stood there with a dead marten in one hand and a child pulling at my coat with 2, and the first full sentence to go through my head was, "This is not mine to carry." I was an old trapper with a bad hip and 40 pounds of pelts and a mule named Judas who hated everyone including me, and whatever had sent this child running down a mountain alone was a thing far bigger than any help I had to give. That was true. I want that on the record. It was true. It was also the coward's truth, and I knew it even then. "Where's home?" I said. My voice came out cracked from 3 weeks of not using it. She just pulled. Up the mountain, the direction that any sane man travels away from in the last week of winter. "Girl, where's your people?" I crouched down, my hips screaming, to get level with her. Her lips were the wrong color. She had maybe an hour of walking left in her, less, and she'd spent God knew how many already getting to me. I could see the frost in her eyelashes. "Sick," she said, and then a word I didn't know in her own tongue, and then, hunting for the English, her small face crumpling with the effort. "Sleeping. They won't wake up. My grandmother said find. Find the trapping man on the creek. She said you. She hit my chest with a small closed fist, not hard, just to make the words land. She said you. Now that put a cold in me that had nothing to do with the weather. Because there was only one old woman in that whole range who would know there was a trapping man on that creek at all, let alone send a child down the throat of a dying winter to find him by name. I'd met her exactly twice in 9 years. Once she'd traded me a pair of the finest snow webs I ever wore for a sack of coffee and a whetstone, and hadn't smiled, and hadn't needed to. Once she'd found me half dead with a leg pinned under a deadfall. I still don't know how she came to be there. And she'd levered it off me with a green pole and set the brake and left me a parfleche of dried meat and walked off into the trees without a word. And I'd never properly thanked her, because I am the kind of man who doesn't. Her name, as near as I could ever wrap my mouth around it, meant something like she who stays. And now her granddaughter was standing in my snow, telling me she wouldn't wake up. I looked up the mountain. The light was already going amber and thin the way it does when the cold means business. I did the count. I counted the hours of daylight I had, which was maybe 3. I counted the ridges between me and where I guessed her camp must be, which was too many. I counted every reason a smart man had to load his mule and go down. Then I looked back at the girl, and she wasn't crying anymore. That was the thing that broke it. She'd stopped crying because crying was for when you still thought someone might be moved by it, and she had already decided I might not be. She was just watching me with those frost-lashed eyes, waiting to find out what kind of man the mountain had handed her. "All right," I heard myself say. "All right, show me. I have done braver things. I have done smarter ones. I don't think I have ever done one I'm less ashamed of." I cached the pelts in a tree crotch and I put the girl up on Judas, wrapped in the buffalo robe I sleep under, which meant I would not be sleeping warm that night or maybe any night soon, and I did not let myself think about that. Judas, who bites, who once put a man in a Fort Griffin bed for a week, stood dead still while I lifted her onto his back and turned his big evil head around and looked at her, and then looked at me, and did not bite. I have stopped trying to understand that animal. She pointed the way with a hand that shook, and we climbed. I'm not going to pretend I remember every hour of it clean. Cold does things to time, but I remember the parts that mattered. I remember that she talked when she had the breath, because I think talking was the only thing keeping her from going somewhere inside herself that she wouldn't come back from. In pieces, over hours out of order, I got the shape of it. Her name was Little Owl, or that's the nearest I ever got. Her people call the small ones by soft names until they've earned a true one, and she hadn't earned hers yet. And now I have spent a long time being sorry about all the ways that turned out to matter. There were, she said, not many now. There had been more. Something had come to the camp, a sickness, a hot sickness. She pressed her own forehead to show me hot, and it had started with the 2 trappers who'd come through before the deep snow, coughing, trading bad blankets, and then it had gone through the camp like fire through cheat grass. The men who could still stand had gone down to the agency for help 2 weeks past and had not come back. The strong ones sickened, then the old ones, then it went quiet. Her grandmother, she who stays, had held out longest, had nursed the others, had 3 days ago taken the girl's face in both hands and said, "Little Owl told me this," looking straight ahead into the dark timber, not at me. "If I sleep too, go down the creek. Find the trapping man. He owes a leg. He owes a leg." That old woman, even from that far off, she reached down and put her thumb right on the one debt I could not argue with. I climbed harder. We came up out of the last band of timber into a hanging meadow just as the last real light went, and I smelled the camp before I saw it, and every hair on me stood up. There's a smell to a place where things have been dying slow, and it is not one thing. It is a stack of things, smoke gone cold, and sickness, and the sweet wrong smell underneath that I will not describe to you because you did not ask to carry it, and I would not put it on you if you had. There were maybe a dozen lodges. Only 2 had smoke, and that thin. Nothing moved. "Grandmother," Little Owl said, and it was not a cry now. It was a small flat sound, the sound of a child who has already, somewhere in the animal part of her that is smarter than the rest, begun to understand a thing the front of her mind won't let her say. She slid off the mule before I could catch her and ran for the nearest smoking lodge, and I went after her with my heart going like a bird against a window. I want to be careful here. There are things I saw in those lodges that I have never told another living soul, and I am not going to start now, because some things a man keeps not out of secrecy, but out of decency, out of the plain sense that the dead are owed at least the mercy of not being made into a story. So I'll tell you only what you need. I'll tell you that there were 9 people left in that camp alive when I came into it. I'll tell you that 6 of them were children. I'll tell you that of the 3 grown people, 2 were so far into the fever that they did not know their own names, and the 3rd was she who stays, and she was not asleep, and she was not dead, though she was closer to the 2nd than the 1st. She was propped against a backrest of willow, and she had, I found out, been keeping the fires alive by feeding them one small stick at a time with a hand that could barely close, refusing to let the last warmth go out on the children while she still had a breath to spend. And she had been doing that for 3 days after she sent the only person who could still walk down a mountain to fetch a stranger who owed a leg. She opened her eyes when little Owl fell against her. She looked past the girl. She found me in the low firelight. And this woman, this dying woman, did the one thing I would have bet the mountain itself she would never do. She smiled. It was a terrible smile. Cracked lips, no strength in it. But it was a smile, and it was aimed at me, and it meant you came. And I have been fed and warmed and even once or twice loved in this long, strange life. And I have never in all of it been given anything I felt less worthy to receive. "Old man," she said in English, because she was kind even then and knew my Apache was garbage. Her voice was a thread. "You are late." "Ma'am," I said, "I generally am." Something that wanted to be a laugh moved in her chest and turned into a cough that folded her in half. And little Owl made a sound I won't forget. And I crossed that lodge and got down on my bad knee in the filth and the smoke beside a woman I'd met twice. And I did the only useful thing I have ever reliably known how to do, which is I took hold of the situation with my hands. I built the fire up. I got water on. I got the buffalo robe off the mule and around the 2 children shivering nearest the door. I did the count, 9 alive, 6 of them small, 2 grown ones gone in the head with fever, 1 old woman with maybe hours, and the count was so bad that a smarter man would have read it as arithmetic that no single old trapper could ever balance, and gotten back on his mule. I did not get back on my mule. She who stays watched me move, and when I finally ran out of things to do with my hands and had to be still, she caught my wrist with her ruined fingers, and she pulled me down close, and she spent some of the little breath she had left on me. "You will want to leave," she said, not unkind, just true the way she'd always been true. "In the night, when they sleep, you will tell yourself it is not yours." I didn't say anything because she was right, and she knew she was right, and lying to a dying woman is a thing I've done, but not that night. Her grip tightened. Her black eyes held mine, and there was the whole mountain in them, the whole hard, indifferent country that takes the strong and the weak the same, and there was something fighting that country from behind her eyes, something small and stubborn that had kept a dozen fires alive one stick at a time. "The sickness will come for you too, maybe," she said. "This is true. I do not lie to you. You stay, you may die here with strangers in the cold for nothing. A breath. It cost her. That is the choice. I am not making it soft for you. I made my granddaughter walk down a mountain to put it in front of you. Now it is in front of you." She let go of my wrist. "Choose, trapping man," said she who stays. "But choose now. Because if you go, I need to know, so I can save the last of my strength for holding this child while she watches you ride away and not waste it hopping." I stayed. I'd like to tell you it was a grand thing. A decision made standing up with the firelight on my face. It wasn't. What actually happened is I opened my mouth to say something and found I had nothing to say. And instead of talking, I turned around and started ripping a spare shirt into strips to bind the coughing so the fever sweat wouldn't freeze on the two grown ones. That was my answer. She who stays watched my back for a while, and then I heard her let out a long breath and say something low to Little Owl in Apache, and the girl came and sat against her grandmother's side, and the old woman finally let herself close her eyes, not to die, I understood later, but to rest, because for the first time in 3 days there was another pair of hands in that camp, and she was allowed to. I did not sleep that night. I don't think I slept more than an hour at a stretch for a long while after. Here is the part nobody tells you about being the only well person in a camp of the sick. It is not dramatic. It is 1,000 small, mean chores done over and over in the cold. It is melting snow for water because everyone is too weak to drink enough. It is cleaning what the fever makes people unable not to soil. It is holding a boy of maybe 5 while he shakes so hard his teeth click, and singing to him, singing with a voice like a rusted hinge. The only song I know all the way through, which is a filthy cavalry marching song, sung soft and slow so it comes out sounding almost like a hymn if the boy doesn't know the words, and he didn't, and it worked, and I have never been able to hear that song since without my throat closing. I counted. God help me, I counted everything because it was the only way I could stand it. I counted the sticks of firewood I had left and it was not enough. So before light I went out with my hatchet and I counted trees and I cut and I hauled until my hip was a white bar of pain and I had a stack that might last. I counted the people. 9. I said it to myself like a prayer or a threat. 9. Keep 9. By the second day the count broke. One of the grown ones, a man Little Owl called Uncle, died just before dawn without ever coming back to his right mind. I carried him out myself alone because there was no one else who could, and the ground was frozen 4 feet down so there was no burying him. And I did the thing you do in that country in that season, which is I built him up a cairn of rock and shale on the meadow's edge with my bare hands until my fingers left blood on the stones, and I said over him the only words I had, which weren't holy but were mine. I'm sorry I was late. I'm sorry I'm not enough. I'm sorry. And I made the count 8, and I hated the count. She who stays was watching from the lodge door, wrapped in my buffalo robe when I came back. She dragged herself there to watch me do it right. When I got close she said, "You buried him facing the sunrise." "Seemed decent," I said. "It is our way," she said. "How did you know it?" I hadn't known it. I just laid a man toward the coming light because I couldn't stand to lay him toward the dark. I didn't say that. She looked at me a while with those black eyes, and then she nodded like I'd passed something and went back in. I need to tell you now about the debt, because this is the thing that undid me, and if I don't tell it in the right place, you won't feel it right. On the 3rd night, the fever came for me. I'd known it might. She'd told me plain. I woke in the black hour with my head full of hot sand and my own teeth going and the terrible clarity you get right before the fever takes your clarity away. And my very first thought, I'm ashamed of it and I'm going to say it anyway, my first thought was not for the children. It was. So this is where it ends. Alone on a mountain nursing strangers for nothing, just like she said. And then a small cold hand touched my burning face. It was Little Owl. She'd been watching me the way I'd been watching all of them, and she did for me exactly what she'd seen me do for the little boy. She got a strip of wet cloth on my forehead and she got me to drink, and when I shook she lay down against my back the way the old woman had lain against her that first night, a small, warm, stubborn weight, and she started to sing. Her grandmother's song in Apache, low and slow. And somewhere in the fever dark, I understood the thing I had been too stupid and too proud to understand up to then. She who stays had not sent for me to save them. She was too wise a woman to think one old trapper could save a fever camp. She'd done the count long before I ever did it, and her count was worse than mine, and she'd known it. She hadn't sent her granddaughter down a mountain for a rescuer. She'd sent her down for a witness, for someone to be there. so that these people would not die the way the mountain wanted them to, alone, unwatched, unwept, buried by no hand and toward no light. She had spent her granddaughter's strength and my old debt to buy her people the one thing she could still give them, the only thing she'd ever really had to give anyone, company at the edge. She hadn't asked me to beat the count. She'd asked me not to let them go into the dark alone. He owes a leg. No, he owes a presence. And I had almost that first night, and again in my fever I had almost welched on it. And a 7-year-old with frost in her eyelashes was, at that very moment, paying my debt for me, singing me back from the same dark I'd been afraid to sit beside for anyone else. I did not die. I want to be clear about that so you're not waiting on it. The fever rode me 4 days and then it broke, and I came back weak as a newborn calf but alive, and little Owl had kept me alive the exact same way I'd kept the others, one mean small chore at a time. But she who stays did not come back. She went while I was still in the fever, so I did not see it, and I have decided to believe that was a mercy for us both. Little Owl told me when I was clear enough to be told in that same flat, brave voice. Her grandmother had waited until she was sure I would live, had asked, near the end, whether the trapping man was still breathing, had been told yes, and had said this is the last thing she said, and Little Owl gave it to me like handing over something breakable, good. Then someone will remember to face them east. Then she'd let the mountain have her. I buried her myself when I could stand, facing the sunrise. It took me a day and a half and I did the count the whole time, and the count was 7 now, 7 alive. And I built her cairn higher than any of the others, and I put on top of it the one thing I owned worth anything, which was a folding knife with a bone handle my own father had carried, because she had reached down and levered a deadfall off my leg once and asked nothing, and I had never thanked her, and this was the closest I was ever going to get. Spring came the way it does up there. All at once and then not at all, 3 false starts and a mud season. 2 more of the sick ones I could not hold. I will not give you their count. I have decided you don't need every number I carry. But 4 children and Little Owl came down off that mountain alive when the passes opened, riding double and triple on Judas, who carried them the whole long way down without one single act of the wickedness. He'd shown every grown man he ever met, and I walked, and my hip has never been the same, and I have never once regretted the trade. I took them to the agency, which is a whole other story with its own griefs in it, and not one I've got the heart to tell tonight. The short of it is that Little Owl and the little boy I sang to were taken in by kin who'd survived down low, good people, and I stood in a dusty yard and watched a woman I'd never met open her arms to a girl who'd once opened hers to me across a frozen clearing. And I did the count, and the count was right for once. The small ones were among their own, and I should have felt like a man who'd done a good thing. I felt like a man who was about to lose something he had no right to keep. Little Owl came to me before I left. She'd earned her true name by then, up on that mountain, in the doing of all those mean small chores beside me. Her kin gave it to her when they heard what she'd done, and it means, near as anyone could put it in English, she who went down. She stood in front of me the way she had that first day, arms not reaching now, just still, a girl who had learned exactly what kind of man the mountain had handed her, and found out it was a better kind than the man himself had believed. She didn't say, "Please follow me home" this time. She was already home. She said, "Will you count me, when you count?" Because she'd watched me do it for months, my one strange habit, my grief tally, my way of keeping hold. She'd figured out what it was for before I ever had. I got down on my bad knee in that dusty yard, and I told her the truth, which was the first easy true thing I'd said in a long while. "Little Owl," I said, because to me she'll always be that, the small soft name, the one from before. "I'm going to count you every day of my life. You're number 1. You always were. I just took too long to say it." That was 7 years ago now. I still run a short trap line, though my hip makes a liar out of me most mornings. I still count. Firewood and marten and the ridges between me and anywhere. And every single night, before the last stick goes on the fire, I do the one count that matters, the one that starts at 1 and stays there, and I face myself east out of an old habit I got from a woman who owed me nothing, and gave me the whole rest of my life anyway. Some nights when the silence up here changes, when it gets that particular thin high quality it had the day it all started, I still find myself looking up at the tree line, half of me bracing for the worst, and half of me, God forgive an old fool, still hopping to see a small shape come out of the dark with her arms already open, saying the 4 words that ruined me and saved me in the same cold breath. She never does. But I keep the fire up anyway, just in case somebody comes down the mountain who needs someone to.